The first light of an ancient Roman morning slipped through the narrow cracks of an insular wall, drifting into a room that never truly rested. Even before the day began, you could feel the city breathing around you, slow, deep and ancient, like something alive beneath the stone. The air held a faint mixture of dust and last night's frying oil, a reminder that thousands of people lived, cooked, and dreamed in rooms just like this one, stacked together in a patchwork of timber and plaster. And before we sink any deeper into this world, if you enjoy these calm journeys into the quieter corners of history, feel free to gently tap the subscribe button. It helps this little channel grow, and it lets YouTube bring you back whenever you want to unwind again. Maybe settle in with a warm drink or turn on a fan and let the noise of the present fade while we wander through the past together. Now then. Outside your door, the building creaked with early footsteps. Someone upstairs shifted their weight, sending a groan through the beams as old as memory. A neighbour whispered to a child, a clay pot scraped along a floor. These were not disturbances. They were the soft rituals of mourning in a Roman tenement, where walls were thin, lives were close, and privacy was more a hope than a reality. You made your way down the stairwell, your hand brushing the smooth railing, a piece of wood polished by generations of palms simply trying not to fall. The stairs wound downward in dim, uneven shadows. The faint smell of wet plaster lingered from last night's cleaning, mixing with the earthy scent of clay jars stored in the corners. Someone passed you. Going up, balancing a jug of water against their hip, offering a tired nod with the practiced ease of someone who had done this every morning since childhood. When you stepped into the street, the air changed. Rome woke in slow movements, like a giant stretching. The stones under your feet were still cold, holding the chill of the night, and a thin mist clung to the lower alleys. Torch soot smudged the walls. A baker's boy hurried past with a covered basket, and the warm smell of bread slipped into the cool morning like a comforting whisper. You walked on, and the smells shifted with each street you entered. Rome had a scent map, familiar, layered, unmistakable. Near the insula, there was always a hint of smoke, dust, and simmered lentils. Near the markets, sharper scents waited: fish, onions, garlic crushed beneath sandals, wine spilled the night before, and through it all drifted the occasional breath of rosemary or incense from a wealthier home on a nearby hill, a reminder that Rome was a city of immense contrasts pressed tightly together. Vendors began opening their shutters, the wooden slats creaking like old galleys pushed out to sea. A man sweeping the street paused to stretch his back, the bristles of his broom resting against the stones. The city's first voices rose. A seller of figs humming to himself, a woman calling to her children, a watchman finishing his night shift and snuffing a torch with a soft hiss, and above it all, Rome's most familiar sound began, the rhythmic clatter of carts rolling over stone. Mule hooves struck the ground in steady beats, pottery rattled inside wicker baskets. The day's goods were on the move long before most people were awake, and the noise echoed down every narrow corridor of the city. At a public fountain, a small group gathered with clay jugs. The water ran clear from the aqueduct, trickling into the basin with a soothing, repetitive sound. The scent here was clean and cool, carrying the faint mineral smell of distant springs. It mingled with the aroma of wool cloaks damp from morning mist, the freshly crushed herbs from a nearby stall, and the dusty warmth of awakening stone. But as you left the fountain and moved toward the forum, the sensory world intensified. Sandaled feet shuffled across paving stones worn smooth by centuries, voices layered over one another. Short greetings, calls to friends, negotiations beginning even before stalls were fully arranged. Metal clinked as shopkeepers unlatched shutters and set out scales. From somewhere deeper within the market came the ringing strikes of a smith's hammer, sharp and steady, as though marking the heartbeat of the waking city. The heat arrived gradually, first on your shoulders, then along the walls, then radiating off the ground itself. Rome did not warm gently. It swelled with heat. Sunlight bounced off pale stone surfaces, filling alleys with bright echoing warmth. People moved carefully through shaded patches, and you could hear the change in their steps as they passed from cool stone to sunlit pavement. The mid-morning smells thickened. Cooked grains, wine, olives brined in clay jars, the sweet smoke of incense drifting from a temple entrance, and less pleasantly the unmistakable scent of waste carried from nearby latrines. Even for a city as sophisticated as Rome, sanitation was a challenge, and the wind decided which smells reached you on any given day. By midday the city felt full of noise, of heat, of life. Children darted between stalls, their laughter rising above the din. Dogs barked near butcher shops. Musicians tuned their instruments near temple steps, sending soft melodies into the air. Arguments flared and faded as quickly as they began, rising like sparks before vanishing in the overwhelming hum of the crowd. Roman afternoons were heavy. The sky brightened, shadows shortened, and the air thickened. People sought shade beneath arcades and awnings. Someone poured water over the stones near a doorway to keep the dust down. The smell of wet rock lifted quickly, replaced by something warmer and grainier as the sun dried it once more. When the sun finally began its slow descent, the city relaxed. The heat eased, the lights softened, and the noise gradually thinned. Vendors closed their stalls, lifting wooden bars and stacking baskets. Lamps flickered to life, their golden glow reflecting in pools and on painted walls. The smell of evening meals drifted through the streets. Garlic sizzling, bread warming, wine uncorked, broth simmering in clay pots. You walked back toward the insula, listening, as voices drifted through open windows. Someone strummed a simple melody on a lyre. A couple argued softly near a doorway before falling into quiet laughter. Farther away, the last cart of the evening groaned its way down the street, the mule snorting in gentle exhaustion. Inside your room, the air felt gentler now. The day's dust settled. The faint glow from a nearby torch flickered across the plaster, casting soft shadows on the wall. Outside, Rome continued its slow, ancient conversation with itself, but more quietly now, as if mindful of its residents easing into rest. And in that dim, peaceful space, the city seemed less overwhelming, and more like a living memory, one you had stepped into, one born from stone and story, waiting patiently for the next dawn to rise. The city's evening quiet carried into the next morning, but today the calm felt thinner, stretched over something restless beneath it. Rome had days like this, days when the air seemed to vibrate even before the sun reached the rooftops. As you stepped outside, you sensed it immediately. People walked with a different rhythm, conversations bubbled quicker. Even the vendors set out their goods with a little extra energy. Today was a day of games at the Colosseum, and the entire city felt it. The sky was pale gold as you made your way toward the great amphitheatre. The streets grew busier with each turn, as though Every alley and footpath gradually funneled into the same ancient curiosity. Sandals scuffed the ground in steady waves. Faces young and old leaned forward with anticipation. Cloaks brushed against one another. Someone laughed ahead, sharp, eager, a little louder than the hour normally allowed. Rome was awake in a different way today, shaken loose from its usual routine. The Colosseum loomed long before you reached it, rising like a massive stone sunrise above the district, its arches stacked in repeating tiers, each one catching early light in warm, soft tones. The stones smelled of dust and old rain, a scent that drifted on the breeze as you approached. Even from a distance you could hear the muffled sounds of preparation, doors clanking shut, carts being unloaded, workers calling to one another through the winding passages hidden inside the walls. As you drew closer, the crowd thickened. Children perched on their parents' shoulders, craning to see the open entrances. Vendors carried trays of wine and honey cakes, their voices blending into an uneven chorus of offers. The smell of baked pastries mingled with the sharper scent of warm animals being guided toward the underground pens. Lions, boars, strange silhouettes behind rough wooden slats. The animals were kept just far enough from the public to avoid panic, but near enough that the musky smell of their fur drifted through the air. You passed through one of the archways and felt the temperature shift instantly. The shade inside the Colosseum's corridors was cool and heavy, like stepping into a cave. The stone walls absorbed the heat slowly, releasing a faint mineral chill that brushed your arms. The floor beneath your sandals was smoother than the streets outside, worn by generations of footsteps filing into the arena. The echoes of voices bounced off the walls, creating a layered murmur that felt both close and distant at the same time. Torches flickered in recessed alcoves, their flames casting trembling patterns along the curved passageway. Workers hurried past carrying ropes, baskets of sand and bundles of tools, their movements efficient and practiced. Somewhere deeper in the structure, a gate slammed shut with a hollow clang that rolled through the stone like distant thunder. The smell here was a blend of damp stone, straw, and a faint iron tang that you couldn't quite place. You followed the flow of people upward, climbing a short set of steps until light spilled across your path. Then suddenly the arena opened before you, vast, bright, almost blinding. The Valerium, a massive canopy of woven fabric, stretched high above like the sail of an enormous ship. It caught the morning breeze, billowing and shifting to cast wide arcs of shade across the seating below. The sound of the fabric fluttering overhead was soft but constant, like waves brushing against a shore. The seats were already filling. People moved through the stands in slow waves, finding their spots, settling onto warm stone benches polished smooth by centuries of spectators. The city's noise had followed everyone into the arena, but here it felt larger, amplified by the sheer scale of the space. Conversations floated upward and mingled into a continuous hum. The aroma of wine, bread, and olive oil drifted through the air, carried by the breeze slipping through the arches down on the arena floor. Workers raked the sand into a smooth layer. The sand was pale and fine, chosen specifically for its absorbent qualities, though few people spoke openly about what it absorbed. The workers moved with deliberate rhythm, their rakes drawing long, even lines across the surface. Occasionally they paused to adjust a piece of equipment or signaled to someone near the edge of the arena. The sound of their rakes scraping through sand was soft but steady, a calm contrast to the restless murmur of the crowd. From the shadows of the Hypogeum, the network of tunnels below the arena, came the faint growls and shuffling of animals. A low rumble rolled up through the floor as a lion tested the wooden barrier of its cage. You could not see the creature, only its silhouette in the slatted darkness, but you felt its presence like a distant tremor. The smell of straw, sweat, and wild animal mingled with the scent of fresh sand and the warm dust rising from the arena. The first part of the day began quietly. A group of performers entered the arena, their colourful cloaks catching light as they moved. They played music on flutes and drums, filling the space with a gentle rhythm meant to ease the crowd into the long day ahead. The melodies echoed around the stone, softening at the edges, blending with the breeze under the velarium. People leaned forward, watching the dancers swirl and bow, the sound of their steps muted by sand. Then the hunts began. A handler stepped onto a platform near the edge of the arena and raised a signal. A gate opened, and the crowd stirred as a boar charged into the sunlight. Its hooves kicking up dust, dogs barked from the opposite side. Their trainers released them with precision. The noise rose, but even then, the Colosseum seemed to swallow it, turning sharp sounds into something more distant, more atmospheric. You watched as the handlers demonstrated control, coaxing the animals into displays of agility and coordination. It was a performance meant to impress, to show mastery over nature. The crowd responded with a wave of applause that rolled across the seats like a soft breeze. As the day progressed, the events grew louder. Trumpets sounded from one of the upper tiers, their sharp calls slicing through the noise. A gladiator appeared near the entrance, stepping into the arena with slow, deliberate movement. His armor caught the sunlight, a dull, warm gleam of metal shaped to fit his shoulders. The crowd leaned forward as if pulled by an invisible thread. The gladiator tested his footing, pressing his heel into the sand, drawing a shallow line with his toe. The arena's vastness seemed to fold inward around him. He was not here to fight to the death. Those dramatic scenes were far rarer than people imagine. Instead, he demonstrated technique, balance, and form. Each movement was controlled and deliberate, crafted to hold an audience's attention without jarring them. The soft thud of his sandals against the sand echoed faintly. When he raised his weapon in a gesture of readiness, the arena answered with a surge of applause. Occasionally, the velarium shifted overhead, adjusting its angle to follow the sun. This sent new shadows falling across the seating, cooling large swathes of spectators and changing the atmosphere with each adjustment. The breeze that passed beneath it carried with it the smells of warm stone, fresh fruit from vendor baskets, and the distant musk of animals still waiting below. As afternoon approached, the crowd's energy began to soften. The heat pressed deeper into the stone, and people relaxed into their seats, sipping wine or sharing small meals. The noise became more rhythmic, less sharp. Even the animals below grew quieter, their movements slower in the rising warmth. By the time the final events ended, the light had shifted into the golden tones of late afternoon. Workers stepped into the arena again, gathering tools and smoothing the sand one last time. The crowd began to disperse, their footsteps creating a soft, steady shuffle through the archways. Outside, the streets filled once more with slow-moving lines of people returning home, carrying with them the dust and memory of the day's spectacle. As you left the Colosseum and stepped back into the open air, the city felt different. The noise was lower, the wind cooler, the scents more scattered and gentle. Rome's energy had crested and now drifted downward, settling into the familiar rhythm of evening. And as you walked away, the Colosseum slowly receded behind you, not silent, but resting, patiently waiting for the next dawn to rise and call the city back again. Beneath the busy streets of ancient Rome, beneath the sandals scraping stone, the clatter of carts, the calls of vendors, there existed another world layered quietly below. A world built by Roman hands, walked by Roman feet, lit by Roman torches. Down here the air felt cooler, as if sunlight itself respected the silence. Your woolen tunic brushed against the stone wall as you stepped into the descending passageway, your leather sandals tapping softly on steps worn by centuries of Romans who once used these corridors in their daily routines. The staircase curved gently, cut from volcanic tuff that held the coolness of the earth. A torch, an actual Roman torch bound with resin-soaked cloth, flickered in its wall bracket, casting amber light along the narrow descent. The smell was unmistakably ancient, Roman, a blend of damp stone, soot, and a faint hint of olive oil from lamps farther below. Somewhere behind you, a drop of water fell with a soft echo, like a distant reminder that the aqueducts above still breathed life into the city. As you reached the bottom, you stepped into a corridor where Roman workers once moved goods between storerooms. The walls were lined with clay amphorae stacked neatly, their rounded bodies resting in carved niches. Some still bore faint painted inventory marks, quick strokes of red pigment noting contents like garum or imported wine. A few amphorae listed slightly to the side, tired from centuries of standing, as though leaning against old friends for balance. Even the dust on them seemed ancient, more a part of the room than something that could be swept away. A small relief carved into the wall caught your eye, a simple outline of a man in a tunic, scratched quickly, perhaps during a long shift. His eyes were uneven, his shoulders lopsided, and his expression suggested a man who had absolutely no idea that people nearly 2,000 years later would still be looking at his doodle. Even in Rome's underbelly, not everyone took their job as seriously as the architects hoped. Farther in, the corridor opened into a larger chamber, a Roman storage room, still intact wooden shelves, darkened by age, held smaller jars sealed with wax. The air here smelled faintly of dry grain and old oil, scents softened by time but unmistakably Roman. A clay lamp rested on a shelf, its wick long extinguished, though ash still clung to the rim. Someone once set it there, perhaps thinking they would return for it later. Like many plans in Rome, later had stretched into eternity. You continued, brushing your hand along the cool stone. The floor dipped gently, the way many Roman basements did to help water drain toward deeper channels. Ahead lay a doorway leading into one of Rome's hidden veins, a side channel of the Cloaca Maxima. But unlike a neglected ruin, this passage still carried running water, the same system Romans relied on daily. The flow echoed through the stone arch, not foul or overwhelming, but earthy and alive with the movement of an ancient city that depended on engineering more than most people realized. Your sandals clicked softly as you walked along the raised walkway. Lamps burned in clay sconces along the wall, the faint smell of olive oil drifting through the passage. The water below murmured in a calm, rhythmic way. Despite its purpose, the Cloaca Maxima held a sense of dignity. It had survived emperors, fires, floods, and reforms, continuing to perform its task with quiet, unwavering loyalty. Occasionally something long lost glimmered near the water's edge. A bronze coin, a sandal buckle, a child's clay bead. Someone had dropped each of these from a street above, unaware they had gifted the future tiny secrets. A turn in the corridor led you deeper until the air shifted again, this time carrying the warm, smoky fragrance of old incense. You emerged into a Mithraeum, an underground sanctuary used by Roman soldiers and labourers. The ceiling arched low, painted once with stars that now faded into soft hints of blue and gold. Two long benches carved from stone lined the sides, where worshippers once sat wrapped in their wool cloaks. The relief of Mithras slaying the sacred bull stood at the far end, its lines softened by time but still commanding. You imagined the room filled, cloaks brushing stone, sandals scuffing lightly, lamps glowing gently as men whispered prayers. This was a sanctuary intended for secrecy, reflection, and perhaps a moment of escape from the bustling world above. It felt oddly peaceful, as though the room itself remembered those slow, hushed gatherings and held on to the calm they brought. Leaving the Mithraeum, you passed into a low corridor patched by various generations of builders, each section of stone revealing a slightly different Roman hand. Some blocks fit perfectly, others were wedged in at odd angles, suggesting repairs done in haste. Rome never rebuilt a space the same way twice. You ducked beneath a low beam, brushing your tunic as you stepped into a room entirely entombed by the rising city above. This chamber was once the ground floor of a small Roman home. Now, it sat quietly several feet below modern street level. Fresco fragments clung to the walls, bright reds, delicate vines, the ghost of a painted bird mid-flight time had cracked the plaster, but colour still lingered like the echo of someone's happiness. You could almost hear the soft sweep of a broom, the laughter of children, the clatter of wooden bowls being set on a table. Lives had unfolded here long before the city swallowed the home whole. In one corner, a collapsed doorway revealed the remains of a kitchen, a stone counter, a trough for washing vegetables, and a broken amphora stained from once holding olive oil. A bronze ladle lay nearby, slightly bent, as though dropped during a busy moment and forgotten mid-step. Rome's underground was full of these tiny moments suspended in time, humble pieces of daily life frozen simply because no one came back to pick them up. Continuing on, you entered a cluster of storerooms connected by low arches. These spaces smelled drier, carrying the dusty scent of old grain and clay. Rows of amphorae stood like silent sentinels, some filled long ago with grain that had hardened into a single solid mass. A wooden crate rested against the wall, its slats held together by ancient Roman nails. Peering inside, you noticed small wooden toys, miniature carts and animals carved for a child. One wheel lay separated from its cart, an accident that likely caused tears long forgotten. You smiled softly. Even in ancient Rome, toys were forever losing pieces. Finally, the path sloped upward. The air warmed. Faint sunlight glimmered at the end of the tunnel. As you climbed, your sandals scuffed the stone, the scent of fresh bread drifting toward you. The sounds of the surface returned gradually. Footsteps, voices, a vendor calling out figs for sale. You emerged into the open, your tunic catching the warm air, your eyes adjusting to the brightness. Rome above buzzed with life once more, but the world beneath, quiet, cool, thoughtful, remained there, holding centuries of memories just below the surface. Rome never truly forgot its past. It simply layered new stories over old ones, like frescoes painted atop earlier murals. And beneath it all the city waited, content to whisper its oldest tales to anyone willing to walk its hidden halls. The walk from Rome's underground world led you gradually into quieter streets where the air felt a little clearer and the noise softened into scattered echoes. The city didn't change all at once. It eased into wealth the way light eases into a room, slow and almost hesitant. Homes stood taller here, built from neatly cut stone, their facades calm and balanced. The smell of rosemary drifted from gardens tucked behind high walls, mixing with the warm scent of sunlit plaster. Your sandals brushed smooth paving stones as you approached a domus belonging to a comfortably wealthy Roman, not a senator, but someone well rooted in the city's upper tier. His home mirrored this steady, quiet prosperity. No marble ambitions, no displays for envy, just sound craftsmanship, meant to endure. A wooden door opened into an entryway, where a young attendant nodded with practiced ease. Inside, the world hushed. The city's noise stopped at the threshold, replaced by the soft sound of water dripping into the impluvium at the centre of the atrium. Sunlight slanted through the open roof, shimmering across the pool and playing lightly across patterned floor tiles. The air smelled faintly of clean water, lamp oil, and a hint of fresh bread cooling somewhere deeper within the house. A servant crossed the atrium, her linen tunic whispering. She carried a clay bowl of figs, moving with deliberate calm. Even the household dog lying near the fountain stirred only long enough to acknowledge you before returning to sleep. Everything moved slowly here, as though time itself softened within these walls. Beyond the atrium, the tablinum opened warmly, its frescoes painted in deep reds and ochres. Scenes of Apollo and woodland nymphs covered the walls, their lines delicate and precise. A pile of scrolls sat neatly tied on a low table, next to a wax tablet still bearing the faint imprint of recent calculations. The faint scent of beeswax lingered in the air. A bronze statue of Minerva stood watch in one corner, polished enough to catch a muted reflection of the room. Past the tablinum, the peristyle garden unfurled in a calm rectangle. Columns framed the open sky, and vines curled upward along the painted walls. A laurel tree rustled gently in the breeze. A small fountain shaped like a dolphin sent water trickling steadily into a shallow pool. Birds rested along the edges of the columns, unconcerned with the quiet footsteps passing below. Along one side of the courtyard lay the dining room. 3 couches surrounded a low table set for the evening meal. Simple foods prepared with care rather than extravagance: olives, fresh cheese, warm bread. Lamps hung along the wall in bronze brackets, their wicks trimmed to provide a steady glow later in the night. A servant arranged the dishes carefully, pausing now and then to adjust their placement, muttering quietly to himself when one platter refused to sit just right. Near the dining space, private quarters formed a quieter wing of the home. A small household shrine housed figures of the Lars, the protective spirits of the family. Fresh flowers sat before them, along with a small offering dish filled earlier that morning. The rooms here smelled of clean linen, polished wood, and the faintest trace of incense from an earlier blessing. In the study, shelves lined with scrolls filled nearly an entire wall. Legal texts, poems, histories, the collected world of a man who valued learning and order. Light filtered through a wooden lattice, falling softly onto the writing desk. A jar of ink rested beside a quill, its tip stained from earlier use. The room felt lived in but tidy, the kind of space where thoughts gathered patiently. A servant in a side room polished a bronze oil lamp, humming under his breath. His motions were slow, unhurried. When he finished, he set the lamp down with a small nod of approval, one of those quiet personal victories that rarely made their way into official histories but shaped the small rhythms of domestic life. The triclinium prepared for guests lay nearby, with mosaic floors in swirling geometric patterns. The tesserae caught the light in shifting colours: greens, smoky blues, warm reds. The walls displayed landscapes that suggested distant villas and quiet countryside. Idealised scenes meant to soothe rather than impress. The air smelled faintly of pine wood from a nearby chest used to store blankets for cooler evenings. At the far side of the house, a small bath suite warmed gently from the hypocaust beneath the floor. The heat pressed upward in a comforting way, softening the air. The water in the calidarium rippled slightly, torches casting gold reflections across the surface. Clay jars held scented oils, lavender, myrtle, rose. A folded towel lay neatly on a bench, ready for the master's use later in the evening. Even here, the household moved with quiet precision. A servant extinguished an outer torch to lower the brightness as sunset approached. The house seemed to breathe more slowly now. A faint melody from a flute drifted from the garden, carried by the soft breeze that swayed the curtains near the doorway. Stepping out into the peristyle again, you felt the temperature changing as night settled. Lamps flickered along the veranda, their light warm and steady. The scents of mint, warmed tile, and distant cooking eased into the evening air. Somewhere in the city beyond, laughter rose briefly before vanishing into the hum of a settling Rome. As you exited the domus, the sky above had turned a gentle violet, with the last gold fading at the horizon. Lamps lit the street in soft points of firelight. Voices moved in low tones, and the rhythm of footsteps drifted lazily through the neighbourhood. The wealthier districts of Rome had their own pace, measured, quiet, content to let the day fold slowly into rest. Inside these walls, life was gentler. Meals were slower, conversations longer, spaces wider. The domus held a different Rome than the insulae or the markets or the underground corridors, but it was still Rome, shaped by the same pulse of the city, bound by the same routines of dawn and dusk. And as you stepped back into the soft evening, it felt as though the entire day had unfolded like a story told in 4 parts, each corner of the city offering its own voice, its own rhythm, its own subtle truth about what it meant to live beneath the ancient Roman sky. The evening air embraced you the moment you stepped beyond the domus gates. Rome always held a different character after sunset, calmer, yes, but also more open, as though the city finally exhaled after holding its breath through the heat and noise of the day. Lamps flickered in gentle lines along the street, each one forming a small sphere of golden light that shimmered against the stone. Your sandals tapped softly as you walked, the warmth of the ground still lingering beneath your feet. The sky above offered a fading lavender glow, deepening gradually into blue. Stars pricked through the last light of day, faint at first, then sharp and bright as the evening settled fully. The scent of cooking drifted through the air, garlic warming in oil, flatbread sizzling on griddles, lamb roasting over coals. Rome never truly slept, but at this hour it felt slower, more humane, wrapped in the gentleness of lamps and twilight. You move toward a broader street where families and workers gathered after long hours spent in workshops, baths, or markets. People in tunics of simple weave lingered outside their homes, talking softly while children played near the doorways. A pair of young boys kicked a small ball made of wrapped cloth, laughing quietly so as not to disturb the lamps being lit by neighbourhood caretakers. The laughter rose, bounced against the walls, and softened into the evening air. Closer to the market district, the streets brightened with activity. Vendors set up temporary stalls lit by small clay lamps, whose flames bobbed gently whenever someone passed. The lamps cast warm, welcoming light across baskets of figs, soft cheeses wrapped in leaves, honey cakes cooling on wooden boards, and small piles of nuts sold by the handful. A woman behind one of the stalls swatted playfully at a stray dog sniffing too close to her basket, though she tossed it a crumb as she did so. A cook flipped thin strips of fish coated in herbs onto a small grill, the sizzling sound mingling with the chatter around him. A plume of fragrant smoke drifted upward, carrying hints of thyme and lemon. You could hear someone further down the street striking a rhythm on a wooden drum, slow, steady, like a heartbeat meant to settle the crowd rather than stir it. Rome's nightlife wasn't loud or extravagant in most neighbourhoods. It was intimate, warm, and quietly alive. Nearby, a storyteller had gathered a small circle of listeners. He wore a worn woolen cloak, and the torch beside him cast long shadows across his face as he spoke. His voice shifted between soft whispers and gentle crescendos, weaving a tale of travellers lost in the mountains north of the city. His hands moved slowly, guiding the rhythm of his story. People leaned in, drawn not by spectacle but by the calm pull of a good narrative told well. Even the dog beside him seemed to listen, eyes half-lidded, as though soothed by the sound. You drifted on, passing a public fountain where several people lined up with clay jugs. Water from the aqueduct spilled into the basin with a soft, steady murmur that blended smoothly with the night's other sounds. The scent here felt fresher. Cool stone, clean water, and the faint herbal fragrance from someone's freshly washed cloak. A woman filled her jug and smiled at a young boy who stood on tiptoe to dip his hands into the basin. He giggled as the cold water ran across his palms before his mother gently nudged him aside. Away from the market, the streets narrowed into a quieter residential district. Oil lamps hung at regular intervals from iron brackets, each flame steady and warm. Above the lamps, laundry hung from rooftop cords, tunics, linen sheets, children's garments swaying softly in the breeze. The shadows of these garments rippled on the walls like gentle waves. Somewhere above, a window creaked open, and someone hummed a tune that drifted through the warm air. You followed the curve of the street into a small open square. Here a few older men sat on a low stone bench talking about the day's news. One held a scroll on his knee, though he seemed to read it more for the feel of reading than for the details inside. They nodded thoughtfully at one another, adding comments with slow gestures. Their conversation blended with the rustling of leaves in a nearby olive tree, each sound settling into the soft cadence of the evening. At the far end of the square, a group of musicians prepared quietly. They carried simple instruments, a lyre, a pair of flutes, and a hand drum. With no particular announcement or ceremony, they began to play. The melody flowed out slow and warm, weaving through the square with a steady grace. People passing by pause briefly to listen before moving along with soft smiles. Even the musicians seemed content simply to add their gentle music to the evening. You continued walking until the faint aroma of fresh bread reached you again. A baker, finishing his final batch for the night, had left his door open to cool the room. Inside, the warm orange glow of his oven flickered against the walls as he pulled out round loaves and set them on a wooden rack. The smell drifted like a comforting blanket through the street. Yeast, warm grain, and the faintest hint of smoke. A man passing by stopped and exchanged a quiet greeting. The baker, wiping sweat from his brow, handed him a small leftover roll with a nod. A little farther ahead, you reached a hill where homes were built with modest terraces. From here, the city stretched out beneath you in soft layers of light. The Forum lay in the distance, its columns lit by torches arranged at their bases. The Colosseum loomed as a shadowed giant further still, its arches faintly illuminated from within. A breeze moved through your tunic, carrying the sense of distant cooking fires, warm stone and a hint of pine from a nearby garden. Along the steps leading upward, people sat in small pairs or groups, settling down to enjoy the view. A couple shared a jug of watered wine, speaking in low, thoughtful tones. A father pointed out constellations to his daughter, her small hand tracing imaginary lines between the stars. A group of young men discussed tomorrow's chores, their voices low with the weariness of long days spent in labour, but softened by the comfort of good company. You paused and listened. Rome's night was not silent, far from it, but its sounds layered gently, never demanding attention. The strum of a distant lyre, the murmur of a conversation carried by the wind, the faint bark of a dog, someone closing a wooden shutter, a pot being set down on a table inside a nearby house, all of it folded into the soft fabric of the evening. As you descended the hill, the lamps created small pools of light that guided your steps. The stones beneath your sandals felt cooler now, storing the last warmth of the sun. Each shadow stretched long and clear, the night steady in its rhythm. Rome at daybreak had felt like a city preparing itself, Rome at midday like a city overflowing, but Rome at night felt like a city resting in its own ancient heartbeat. You returned toward the quieter streets that would lead you home or to whatever room you rested in. The night deepened to a calm blue-black, and the stars shone brighter now, unchallenged by the fading glow of dusk. Your footsteps blended with the evening's soft chorus, part of a city that carried its people through every hour with steady ancient patience. Rome never rushed its nights. It let them unfold gently and without urgency, just like the people who walked its streets. And as the last lamps flickered in the distance, the city seemed to settle into a long, thoughtful breath, waiting quietly for the next dawn to rise across its rooftops once again. Night had settled fully by the time you reached the quieter edge of the neighbourhood, soft at the edges, darker above the rooftops, and warm wherever lamp flames brushed the walls. Rome breathed differently now. The urgency of the day had dissolved into something slower, shaped by small domestic rituals and the hush of a city finally exhaling. Your sandals whispered along the stones as you walked, the last warmth of the day still clinging to the ground. A faint breeze drifted in from the west, carrying the cool scent of the Tiber and the earthy aroma of clay tiles cooling overhead. Doors closed softly one by one, bolts sliding into place with a gentle echo. Conversations dimmed to murmurs behind shutters. Rome, so loud in daylight, seemed almost mindful of the people settling into rest. You passed a baker's shop, already dark, its lamps extinguished, but the fading warmth of the oven still radiated through the wall. The toasted scent of grain lingered faintly, as if the air itself remembered the day's work. A clay amphora sat near the entrance to be collected in the morning, catching a muted gleam from a distant lamp. Farther on you heard quiet laughter from an open window. Two sisters folded linen inside, their voices rising and falling in soft rhythm. The gentle snap of fabric, the brief hum of a tune, and then the shutters closed, sealing the sound away like a candle being snuffed. A richer smell drifted toward you. Garlic mellowed over heat, lentils simmering in a clay pot, crushed between a cook's fingers. You passed a modest insula where a family prepared their evening meal. Through the doorway, a small brazier flickered. A woman stirred a pot slowly while her husband sliced bread beside her, moving with the unhurried familiarity of another long day ending. On the floor, a child traced letters on a wax tablet, his stylus tapping softly. Continuing on, you reached a home where lamps still glowed gently. A servant swept the entryway, the bristles whispering across the tiles. He paused only to shake out the dust before returning to his steady rhythm. Inside, a couple shared a simple supper: vegetables, bread, a bowl of cheese, speaking in low tones as a lamp cast warm light across frescoes of soft reds and ochres. The lane opened into a small courtyard centred around a fountain. Water spilled into the basin with a cool, steady murmur. A few neighbours gathered here, rinsing their hands or filling jugs. A young woman lifted a jug to her shoulder, bracelets chiming softly. An older man sat at the fountain's edge, telling his grandson a quiet story while the boy leaned close, eyes heavy with sleep. A cat wandered past, settling on a warm tile near the fountain, its tail curled neatly around its body, eyes closing in contentment. The gentle splash of water and the soft murmur of voices blended into the kind of scene Rome excelled at: quiet, warm, ordinary, and deeply human. A narrow stairway rose beside one of the homes. Drawn by the faint flicker of a lamp above, you climbed. The steps were smooth with age. At the top, the night opened around you. Several families relaxed on their rooftop terraces, seeking the cool breeze after a warm day. Clay stools, low chairs, and thin blankets were arranged in familiar configurations. A mother rocked her child slowly, humming a tune that drifted through the air like a warm thread. A pair of older men played a simple board game, their pieces clicking softly against the wood. A young couple shared roasted nuts, speaking in low, thoughtful tones as they looked out over the city. You walked to the edge and looked out across the rooftops. Lamps formed trails of golden light along the streets. The Forum glowed faintly in the distance, its columns lit from below. The Colosseum loomed further still, a solemn silhouette against the deepening sky. A gentle breeze tugged at your tunic, carrying hints of pine, warm stone, and the faint smoke of evening fires. The city sounded softer here, a distant lyre, a closing door, quiet laughter from a nearby terrace. Even the noise of a late cart rolling through the street below felt muted, softened by distance and darkness. You stayed for a moment, letting the calm settle around you. Rome's night had a way of smoothing the sharp edges of the day. Up here, above the bustle, the city felt both vast and familiar, ancient yet alive with small human rhythms. Eventually you descended, stepping back into the lane where only a few lamps still burned. Most windows were shuttered now. Homes glowed faintly behind their walls, the last traces of conversation slipping away. The stones beneath your sandals felt cooler, the air settling into its deepest quiet. You walked slowly, savouring the final notes of the evening, the faint smell of warm tile, the soft rustle of leaves, the gentle hush of Rome resting. A few distant voices murmured, fading quickly. A torch flickered in its bracket, illuminating a patch of wall before dimming again. As you reached the edge of the district, you glanced back. The rooftop shimmered under starlight, and the last lamps glowed like scattered embers waiting for dawn. Rome, vast and ancient by day, seemed small and peaceful at night, like a friend easing into sleep. The city rested in a soft, even breath, waiting quietly for the next sunrise to brush its stones with light once more. The night deepened as you walked, settling into the parts of Rome that existed only after the lamps had burned low. By now, even the most active streets had quieted. The merchants had gone home, torches were being snuffed one by one, and the city took on its true nighttime character, a blend of lingering warmth, distant sounds, and the gentle uncertainty that comes when most people sleep and only a few remain awake. Your sandals brushed softly across the stones as you entered a narrower street lined with shuttered windows. The air felt cooler here, touched by the faint breath of the Tiber moving through the city's quiet pathways. Somewhere above, a loose shutter creaked in the breeze. Farther still, a dog barked once, then settled into silence again, as though reminded that the hour belonged to rest. A night watchman moved toward you, carrying a small lantern suspended from a bronze hook. His tunic was heavier than daytime wear, wrapped with a woolen band to guard against the coolness of night. The flame of his lantern flickered across the walls, lighting his path in gentle strokes. When he saw you, he nodded with calm familiarity, a silent acknowledgement between two people still awake while the city dozed. He paused at a doorway, checking the bolt, then continued on, his sandals tapping in a rhythm both steady and quiet. Rome's night watch was not loud or forceful. It was a slow, methodical presence, more a reassurance than a warning, meant to guide anyone returning late and discourage mischief without ever raising its voice. You followed the curve of the street into a small square partially lit by a single standing torch. Its flame danced in a slow, lazy pattern, casting wide shadows across the paving stones. A stone bench sat along one side of the square, warmed earlier by the sun but now cool to the touch. A man rested there, wrapped in his cloak, watching the torch sway as though lost in thought. He nodded as you passed, not startled by your presence, just part of the quiet fraternity of those who lingered awake a little longer than most. Beyond the square lay one of the smaller side streets leading toward the river. Here, the city's smells shifted again. Warm stone gave way to the cooler sense of damp earth and water. You could hear the low murmur of the Tiber flowing beyond the walls, a steady, ancient sound that had shaped Rome's life since its earliest days. The river's voice at night was different from its daytime one, slower, deeper, as though the current understood the need to soften itself after so many hours of bustling beside the city. A lone fisherman sat near the embankment, repairing a net by lamplight. His fingers moved with practiced ease, pulling and looping the fibres while humming quietly to himself. A clay jar rested beside him, half full of the day's modest catch. He didn't look up as you passed, his concentration wrapped tightly around the simple rhythm of his work, but the soft hum continued, blending with the water's murmur in a way that made the scene feel timeless. You stepped back from the river path and returned to the city's inner streets, where the faint glow of distant torches guided the way. A tavern door was open just a crack, spilling out the dimmest sliver of lamplight. Inside, a handful of late drinkers murmured over watered wine. Their voices drifted into the street like a soft, worn-out melody. A servant wiped tables and collected empty cups, moving with the low, habitual motions of someone ready for sleep, but still bound by duty. The air smelled of warm clay, diluted wine, and the fading sweetness of roasted barley. Further ahead, the streets narrowed again. Laundry hung overhead like pale banners, shifting gently in the night breeze. These upper walkways and lines crossed overhead in a pattern that always felt like an invisible canopy, soft, domestic, shaped by the hands of countless families living close together. One linen sheet fluttered, revealing the faintest trace of a floral scent from its earlier washing. A pair of cats darted across the way, chasing something you couldn't see. Their little paws tapped softly as they disappeared into the shadows. Moments later, one reappeared atop a low wall, tail flicking with the smug confidence of a creature who knew it owned more of Rome's evening than anyone admitted. It blinked at you once, then settled down, clearly deciding it had no intention of moving again. You reached a rooftop stairwell similar to the one you visited earlier. This time the steps were dimmer, but curiosity guided your feet upward. At the top, the rooftop opened into a quiet expanse of terraces, all sleeping beneath the deepening night. A single lamp glowed at the edge of one home, left as a gentle signal to a family member expected late. Its flame swayed faintly, reflecting against a water jar sitting beside it. From here, the city stretched in darker tones. The Forum now lay silent, its columns faint silhouettes against the starlit sky. The Colosseum, once echoing with daytime noise, stood as a quiet giant, majestic, resting, its arches filled with shadows instead of crowds. Even the distant hills appeared softened, like sleeping animals curled around the city. You sat for a moment on the rooftop's low wall. The breeze brushed your face, carrying with it hints of cool stone, olive wood, and the faint lingering smoke of extinguished lamps. Your tunic rustled lightly as you shifted. The rooftop world held a gentler rhythm, slower than the streets, quieter than the homes, more open than any room could be. Below, a child cried briefly, then fell silent as a parent soothed them. A cart rumbled faintly in the distance, its wheels tapping against stones in a spaced, weary pattern. Someone closed shutters with a final firm slide. A dog curled into a sheltered corner and settled into sleep with a soft exhale. These sounds blended into the quiet chorus of Rome's nighttime, each contributing a small note to the city's vast, ancient lullaby. You rose and descended the stairwell, walking back toward the district where your night would end. Only a few lamps remained lit now, their flames low but steady. The shadows grew longer and softer, filling corners with gentle darkness. Your sandals made the quietest of sounds as you passed homes now fully at rest. At one doorway, a small clay lamp flickered behind a curtain. At another, a man leaned briefly against the wall, stretching his back before retreating inside. A single torch burned near the end of the street, lighting the path with a warm golden glow that pooled across the stones. As you approached the final turn, the night settled into its deepest calm. The wind slowed, the lamp steadied, and the city exhaled once more, slow, even, ancient. Rome at night felt like a friend growing drowsy beside you, confident that its old stones and winding streets would hold steady until dawn. And as you stepped into the quiet place where your own sleep waited, the last sounds of the city softened into a hush, leaving only the steady breath of Rome resting in the dark, waiting patiently for morning light to return. Night in Rome had a way of settling not just over the rooftops, but into the stones themselves, into the alleys, the courtyards, the doorways, the quiet rooms where families slept. By this hour, even the most stubborn lamps had burned low, their flames small and steady like thoughts drifting at the edge of dreaming. The air felt cooler now, shaped by the slow breathing of a city at rest. You walked softly along a narrow lane, guided only by starlight and the faintest glow from a distant torch. The stones beneath your sandals held the last memory of daytime warmth. Fading slowly into the deep blue quiet of the night overhead, laundry lines hung motionless, tunics, sheets, children's clothes swaying only when the slightest breeze wandered through. The sky above Rome stretched wide and clear. Stars pricked through the darkness with a sharpness only achieved when the city fully surrendered to sleep. A thin crescent moon rested low above the rooftops, its pale glow brushing the skyline like the quiet stroke of a painter's hand. Beyond it, the constellations the Romans once charted in their stories, hunters, heroes, wandering twins, stood watch in their familiar ancient positions. The houses around you were shuttered tight. Behind each door lay small stories wrapped in sleep. A mother curled beside her infant, a baker's apprentice resting with flour still clinging to his hair, an older couple breathing slow and steady beneath woolen blankets. Their dreams drifted quietly in the night air, like threads weaving the city together. A faint breeze slipped through the street, carrying cool traces of the Tiber curious. You followed the gentle pull of the river's scent. As you neared the embankment, the air shifted, cooler, fresher, touched with the faint mineral breath of water moving beneath the stars. The Tiber at midnight was almost unrecognizable from its daytime self. Gone was the bustle of workers hauling goods or fishermen preparing their lines. Now it flowed like a slow, dark ribbon, reflecting the night sky in long, wavering strokes. The stars shimmered on its surface, breaking softly whenever the current rippled. The river seemed to speak a different language at this hour, a low, thoughtful murmur, as if sharing a memory only the stones and water could understand. Across the way, a bridge arched in calm silence. Its outlines were softened by shadow, but the torch at its far end cast a small pool of flickering gold onto the stones. No one crossed it now. Even the night watch moved elsewhere, leaving the bridge in the quiet company of the water and the sky. You rested your hands on the cool railing and let the breeze brush gently across your arms. The scent of damp earth and riviera reeds drifted upward. Somewhere upstream, a night bird called once before, falling slenant again. The sound travelled across the water with a clear, silvery tone that dissolved into the vastness of the night. You moved on, your footsteps soft, following a path lit only by the stars. A rooftop terrace above you glowed faintly, just one lamp left burning low beside a jar of water. Someone had forgotten to extinguish it before bed, or perhaps had left it intentionally, a gentle marker for a child who sleepwalked or a parent who worked late. The flame fluttered, but did not waver, held steady by the stillness of the hour. As you continued through the quieter district, Rome felt more like a collection of dreams than a waking city. Every sound came wrapped in distance, a muffled cough behind a shutter, a clay cup being set gently on a table inside a home, the rustling of someone shifting beneath blankets. These tiny traces of life drifted through the night like stars scattered across a dark sky. Not bright, not loud, just present and softly glowing. A cat sat atop a window ledge, watching you with half-lidded curiosity. Its ears flicked once before it settled deeper into its curled position, tail wrapped neatly around its paws. Even the animals of Rome seemed to sleep more deeply at this hour, assured by the slow, unbroken rhythm of the night. At the end of the lane you found another rooftop stairwell and climbed. The steps were smooth from years of use, each one carrying echoes of countless feet that had ascended in search of cool air and a place to breathe. When you reached the top, the night unfolded around you in its widest, quietest form. Rome stretched beneath you like a sea of shadows and faint embers. Lamps glowed in small clusters, scattered light that looked almost like fireflies hovering above the stone. The domus rooftops formed a soft, uneven pattern, their edges outlined gently by moonlight. The streets wove through the city like dark threads, silent now, except for the occasional whisper of wind. The Forum lay still, its columns pale ghosts beneath the moon, their long shadows stretched across the open square, silent witnesses to 1,000 years of footsteps now resting in peaceful darkness. Even the temples stood quiet, their altars unused until morning. The statues, gods, heroes, emperors, cast soft silhouettes, their marble faces turned toward the sky in patient stillness. Further away, the Colosseum rose like a giant curled into sleep. The arches that once echoed with roaring crowds now held only pockets of shadow, and the low sigh of wind drifting through. It looked both powerful and peaceful, an enormous creature resting after a long day, waiting for the sun to stir it awake again. You sat on the low rooftop wall and let the silence settle around you. The breeze brushed against your tunic, light and unhurried. The stars gleamed overhead, sharp and ancient. Their light reached across centuries to touch the stones of Rome, just as it had touched the city when it was young, when its streets were new and its stories still unfolding. Below, the city slept with a unified breath. Each home, each alley, each courtyard held its own pocket of warmth and quiet. Dreams drifted behind walls. Lives paused just long enough for the city to rest. Even the distant hills seemed to relax, their silhouettes soft soft against the horizon. You stayed until the first hint of dawn brushed the sky, a pale tentative glow rising behind the rooftops like a whispered promise. The stars dimmed one by one. The Tiber shifted from black to deep blue. Somewhere below, a rooster called once, too early, not yet answered. By the rest of the waking world, Rome stirred gently, the way someone stretches before opening their eyes. The night exhaled its final breath, and as the first light touched the stones, the city began to wake, slow, quiet, ancient, and endlessly alive.